Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully anyone else that wants to join will get caught up to speed as soon as possible. So this is the second session of Building Power Platforms, and my name is Regina Jackson. I'm President and CEO of the East Oakland Youth Development Center. I'm really delighted to talk about building platforms that will help your organizations be sustainable. Our first session was on development, and if you weren't able to listen to that session, you can request a recording and get all the goodies that I shared then. Today's session is focused on communication, which is really critical to development and pretty much everything. Telling your story and telling it well is such a critical component to any messaging, but especially nonprofit organizations. Before we get started in the presentation itself, I want to run a couple of polls. Really just wanting to understand who's in the room so that I can better cater to some of the interests. So I'm going to defer to Annalise. Well, maybe I won't. So I'd like to know if you are joining for the first or second time. So if you can click on the bar that says I'm joining for the first time or I'm joining for the second time, that will be really great. And we have just a couple other questions and then we will get started straight away. Okay, so let's go ahead and prime the second poll. Annalise, can we get the second poll up? Great. So are you directly responsible for communications? And what I mean by that is, as a president, although it's not my job role to do communications, I actually engage in it and review everything. So I'm directly responsible. So I just want to know if you have a direct connection or if it's a tertiary or. Great responses, really quick with the clicker. So we're going to go on to the next poll. Have you considered updating or changing your theory of change since COVID? And you'll understand why I mentioned that. You know, obviously this is a really acute time, and being able to refresh and take a look at what your messaging is out there is critical. Thank you. And I think we have one more final poll and then we are going to launch. Well, I was incorrect. I only had 3 questions. So we're going to go ahead and move forward. And if we can go into my first slide, I'd appreciate it. Terrific. So the East Oakland Youth Development Center programs have focused on 4 buckets: careers, education, wellness, and art. And the reason I showcase this is because you may be seeing EOYDC all over the place. You know, we've gone to China, we've done service missions in Haiti, but that in fact is under the model of education, our Pathway to College program. You may follow our platforms on social media and see our Workforce Wednesday posts. And that's where we're celebrating the careers of our alumni. So when we look at breaking out our programs specifically, it's really important to identify clearly what they are, because people see something and then they kind of put it in their head, and they're like, oh, I'm going to go back because so-and-so was giving a, I don't know, a poetry speech, slam speech, but then it may not fit directly. It might fit into art, but it's just really important when you communicate to hone in on what are your programs, what are your priorities, and be able to speak directly to that. So I'd like to go into the next slide and just give you a kind of a backdrop so that we can move forward on understanding how, what, and when you communicate. So I'm going to tell you a story, and it goes back, 27 years to 1994 when I first started at EOYDC. I came in October, and I had very specific guidance that what I needed to do was get back to basics in 2 months. And so literally I was going to be cutting $1.8 million from our budget. And on day one, I had to make that announcement. Can you guess that that wasn't a real popular announcement? But what was more important, obviously, was the clarity with communication to staffers so that they understood, even if they didn't agree, with what I was doing. But the gift was that there was a public relations person on staff for one of the bigger initiatives that was being cut, quite frankly. And when we met, we talked about the importance of messaging around back to basics so that it didn't just seem like EOYDC was just cutting left and right without any, direction, goal, or purpose. And so that's when I learned the value of a press release so that you can get your message out there and get it as clear and as direct with quotes and data and what have you. And even if there's gossip or negatives around the decision, you still have clarity for the justification for the decision. And it was in drafting that press release that I understood the power of telling your story. Now, press releases are still used today, even though some of our communication mediums are different. I went from that 2-month advance on cutting a staff from 42 and a half people to 12. And then within the next 2 or 3 months, when I unveiled new programs, we put out other press releases. And we were on CNN for our cooking program. We had all kinds of media that wanted to cover programming, even if it was at a skeletal level. And so what I had the opportunity to do through communications was rebrand what EOYDC was doing. And not too long after that, it's as if people had forgotten that we had to make that major, very uncomfortable, but critical shift. And so getting the communication out there clearly and kind of in a one-way direction is really, really very important. So how, what, and when do you communicate? It will be different for every organization. It depends on what your capacity and your staffing is. It depends on what it is that you're trying to promote. For those of you during COVID who aren't actually engaging in direct on-site programming, but doing it virtually, there's a challenge in doing it, but it's actually one that can be met very well. The important thing is that, in fact, you do communicate. So, we don't have, we got social media platforms now that get our message out there very quickly. And that's such a gift because it's not something we had back in the 90s. So then you also might have newsletters. You may have an exceptional, what used to be a mailing list, but is now a listserv that you can email. And you may have some other avenues that I'm not even aware of. Depending upon what you have, here are the key components to how you use it. Does your organization have social media platforms? Some don't. But I do find that it is the best investment because it's all free. And you can craft your message no matter what else is going on in the world. The importance of that, though, is having a following. So it's not just your organization's message. As a matter of fact, before EOYDC had a social media platform, I was developing my own. And so what I was able to do is then have my followers, as many as possible, invite them to follow EOYDC. And we are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and now LinkedIn. And, some of you may be thinking, oh my God, that's too many. And it might be. I mean, for us, we are looking at the different target audiences we have. And we'll talk a little more in that next slide. But for now, what we find is that there are different audiences on each of the different platforms, and they're all important to our work. So you have to determine what platforms may be important to your work. As it relates to communications, what you really need is good pictures and good video. If you have someone with graphic design capabilities, that's terrific, but you don't have to. I mean, that's, for really just kind of really sussing up or celebrating. And, there's all kinds of tools, Canva and others, that you can use to really blow up and celebrate these different posts. The other thing that's really important is who's going to help you with that communication strategy. So recently, one of my funders, Ayana Moody, she actually promoted a TED Talk that I'd had. And so it wasn't just me posting, it was other people sharing those posts. And if your staff is really involved in social media, or if they like individual posts, I would encourage them to share those as well. Your board can be another great resource. They can share. And one that is a personal favorite of mine is really my own young people. So they share our posts, whether they're personal posts, organizational posts, and they post as well, and then we share their work. So what you're trying to do is amplify that message, whatever it is. As well, for us, we do a newsletter. We do it pretty much every other month. But when you get close to the holidays, you're communicating more. You're doing more messaging, typically around online giving campaigns or what special needs your audience has. So, toy drives, whatever those things are. And again, you can decide what works for you. So if it's a quarterly messaging, that's fine. We actually have a tendency on social media to post 5 days a week. We have different campaigns that address different issues. So for us, we may focus on, Motivational Monday. And whether it's a quote from a famous person, a fabulous picture, whether it's our organizational picture or just something out there in the world, Monday is critical. And so you want to just give out a good inspirational message. We have Terrific Tuesdays. You have flexibility around whatever terrific is, right? And then I mentioned that we are celebrating our alums in terms of the workforce, and that's Workforce Wednesdays campaign. And then who doesn't love Throwback Thursdays? Our organization is 42 years old, and although we don't have pictures that go back 42 years, not a lot anyway, it is also really exciting for those young people who started out with us, who are now maybe, in their late 30s and or early 40s, to be able to see pictures of themselves. And, especially since we don't have the cameras, you know, on the cutting room floor, all those pictures, when you're able to lift something out of history, usually people want to embrace it and then celebrate it on their own pages as well. And then we have Feature Friday, and that's flexible. We started out by making Feature Fridays a focus on our staff, both our professional staff and our youth staff. And who doesn't like to be celebrated? That is really, really key when you're talking about your messaging. And the pride of sharing our young people's accomplishments or how far they've come or what they're doing now is an important message to not just those young people, their parents, volunteers, and certainly your donors. So being plugged in, having a strong communications plan is really critical. So as I mentioned again, whether you're doing newsletters, whether you're doing social media posts, whether you're doing emails or anything else, you know, blogs, podcasts, what have you, those mediums are exceedingly important. Building your following base is also critical. And then encouraging as many different people as possible to share your messages so that it gets amplified is really, really important. So now we'll go on to the next slide. And then certainly if there are any people who want to put questions in the chat, I can try and address them as we're moving forward, or we can do it at the end. We will definitely have time. So I mentioned briefly, who's your target audience? Again, this is going to be different based upon what work you do. But for us, when we took a look at who is it that we are messaging to, the first for me is always the young people. And young people don't want a message that their parents may want. So then there's a second audience, which is our parents. They are looking for information for their young people. They're looking for, you know, why should I bring my child to you? Or should I refer the cousins and all that kind of stuff? So that's really important to design that uniquely for them. Then you have another audience, which may be your board. I happen to have 2 boards that I report to. And so, you know, they're looking for, you know, what kind of action can I take? How can I support? Then you have donors. Yes, your donors are on your social media. They are on your LinkedIn. They're everywhere because they are people and they're always looking for good information. So I have about 4 or 5 target audiences. At the end of the day, it's really not that difficult to try and identify what the different wording might be, or in fact, reaching those different audiences through different platforms. Our younger audience is on Instagram, our older and maybe more corporate audience is on Twitter. Facebook is kind of multi-generational, and then LinkedIn may be a bit more professional. It kind of depends, but if you have a quality message, most everybody is going to get it and appreciate it. Why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, so what role do you want the funder to play? For me, I was actually surprised when our funders would start calling and asking us if we could submit our pictures to them. They wanted to include them in promotional materials. They wanted to include them in annual reports. They wanted to include them in special initiatives. Wow. This is a really good thing because you are getting not only an opportunity to showcase a critical and unique perspective, but the funder needs your information, not just to promote you, but to promote all of the work that they're doing. So you want to make sure that, as I mentioned, those quality pictures, and it's usually pictures they want, but video is important too, but it goes more to, you know, that younger audience that wants videos, or the parents who are like, hey, this is cool, this is different. And you can even float through a few other different mediums, pictures and video. And I remember when my board president, Terry Blanchard, unfortunately, he passed in April due to COVID. But he came and sat with our communications staff, and he showed them how to celebrate our Halloween party. And you had, you know, witches flying on brooms through the pictures, and then a little video, and it was just a lot of activity, but the kids loved it. And my communications staff enjoyed it as well. So, you know, it just kind of depends on what it is that you want to do. But as we look at the funder, it's really important, because once they look at you one time and you deliver them quality product, they keep coming back. And then they begin to identify you as that go-to person. Why is that important? Because the more shine you get with the funder, the more valued you are, the more celebrated you are, maybe the more money you get. But it's all like responsibility inside an organization, right? The more valuable an employee demonstrates themselves, the more opportunities they get. And who doesn't want that? The other thing is that sometimes these same funders will promote your giving campaigns. They may give individually, separate and apart from the organizational perspective. So you want to look at the various multi-level capacities that you can attract. And funder in this particular perspective is a volunteer, is somebody that's just looking for a good place to invest, and your posts, your pictures, your messaging make them feel good. So therefore, they want to place some money there where they can think, I can have some impact. And everybody wants to have some impact. Let's move to the next slide, please. So one of the things that I'm going to kind of go left to go right, because I actually forgot about another really critical opportunity in communications. And that is for you as the individual to move an agenda that's very specific to you. So in November, I celebrated a birthday, and Facebook allows you to set up a birthday campaign. Well, I set a goal of $3,000 and I met it in a week. Then I moved the goal to 5,000 because, you know, I'm a president. You know, you meet a goal, you make another one. But also, I realized that people wanted to keep giving, so we wanted to keep getting. And we actually, at the end of that 2-week campaign, met that goal and exceeded it. I think it ended up being about $5,200. And what that did was that led me right into our online campaign. So people were already getting in the habit of giving. And so I'm like, okay, and here's another way you can give. Maybe not to those people, maybe they will pass on to their friends, but it keeps it going and going and going. So now I'm going to shift back to the slide that's on, which is the George Floyd murder. And I do want to say that, you know, the unfortunate death of George Floyd, and we've had way too many deaths, it was a signal in the world that social justice was not being met. And so what happened was you had funders, media, everybody kind of pivoting to focus in on this issue. Black Lives Matter, you know, policing, just all kinds of social media agendas, platforms, and advocacies. And for us, we started receiving calls from news stations saying, hey, what are you doing around this? And it turns out that we had just opened our building because we were doing a shelter in place, and we were prepping for our summer program and had actually launched it. So we were able to invite them down, and part of our life skills programming was doing African history. And we were teaching young people about their own power of identity formation. We'd also just had a few of our alumni organize an incredible protest against violence, one that both Steph Curry and Clay joined in as well. So it got a lot of media. And ABC was able to use the snippets that they got from inside the organization, interviewing young people about, their own feelings around social justice, and then adding the footage from the marches. And there you had it, another whole story to tell. And what it also did for us was to help us get the story out there that social justice is not a moment that is separate. It is flowing throughout the lives of our young people, throughout the lives of their parents, throughout the lives of communities across the country, and in fact, the world. We saw people marching in Russia, in the UK. It was a moment of unification around disproportionately unfair, illegal, and bad practice. But this was a communication tool that fell in our lap, and we knew what to do with it. So always be ready when the media calls, and these days, you're able to send information to the media. It won't always get used, but they will tell you we can't be everywhere. So if you can send us some video footage, perhaps a press release, maybe a few pictures, you can get that placement. And of course, that circulation in media is way bigger than any LinkedIn or Instagram post. Well, I haven't had one go viral yet, so maybe not. But it's a great partner in terms of getting your message out there, because you never know when somebody will see a post and then go onto your website and then go on to your social media and then become a fan or share your message or become an investor. So there's a multi-level opportunity there. So why don't we go on to the next slide. So this was one of the polls that we ran earlier, and I wanted to know about it because we actually changed our theory of change based upon what was going on for our organization during COVID. And the thing that's kind of critical is when you're looking at designing your mission and your vision and your logic model, typically you don't throw everything, the whole kitchen sink, into your work. And what we recognize is that initially our theory of change focused on the top three identifiers: the character building, the readiness, and the access. But the other three that we decided to add were really a clarification, an acknowledgement, and a manifestation of what has been a part of our programming since at least 1994, and probably even before my presence here. And so adding the social and emotional learning, that piece was really critical, because in terms of helping young people receive messages, learn, achieve, they need to be connected with in a social and emotional space. It helps them to be more aware of their own their self-awareness, the decisions that they make, how they manage their self-control, and even their own messaging on a social media platform. The relationship skills that are not really focused on in schools anymore, critical thinking, all that kind of stuff, those are wrapped up in our social and emotional learning. The social justice piece, we just spent some time talking about that. While we are not necessarily considered an organizing agency, what we do teach is agency. We teach our young people around the importance of them being subject matter experts of their own experience. And whatever their experiences are, however they're feeling, they should learn to advocate for themselves. And so when they see something going on that's wrong in the world or wrong on their block, we want them to move to think about it critically and to act. And then certainly, and you know, not finally, but identity formation is so key to understanding the trajectory of one's life and breaking down identity formation, both the negative experiences that contribute to their identity as well as the positive. They need to be acutely aware of how those show up in their lives, because, you know, all you need is some of the trauma that our streets are filled with. And if a young person isn't kind of focused on really not being, allowing themselves to be destroyed by their circumstances or by their experiences. And that is so important to wanting to live, to deciding that they're going to make critical decisions that support their agency as opposed to, you know, demonize them. So we are still looking at this theory of change, but I wanted to share our example so that you would understand what it was that went into identifying how we have not shifted, but acknowledging that there are many other considerations that help us recognize how we change and impact our young people. And then certainly, you know, we list our comprehensive goal, but it really is the theory and how we get there and how you communicate to everyone what goes into loving and building the capacities of our young people so that they can be successful adults and then raise great, healed and informed children. And it's important for you all to give yourselves permission to make those pivots. Once we pivot here, we won't just change. This will be our theory of change until we, you know, have some effort or update in our strategic plan where we want to look at it again. But for the most part, the George Floyd and the social justice movement kind of awakened our thoughts that we actually were doing ourselves a disservice by not calling out these other threads that were so important to the quilt of success that we have built inside our organization. So we can go on to the next slide. So back to communication strategies. We did some different things that communicated our agency to the agency. So what do I mean by that? During COVID, we know that mask wearing is critical. And so I gave a challenge to my staff to send me their best mask picks. And we put together in this center visual a pick of all of our, well, not all of our staff, but at least the ones that sent me their masks, to give a sense to the outside world. These are the folks that are engaging your young people. These are the people who have this social and emotional investment in your child, in your teen. And it was really important for people to see these faces, these eyes, and certainly the individualism of their masks. To the left, this is a picture of a story time element that we started doing. So while we were sheltering in place, we were trying to figure out, how do we connect with our young people, especially the youngest young people who don't necessarily understand what is going on in the world? And, you know, it's like, oh gosh, how do you access, you know, we can call our 5 and 6 year olds, but it's not the same as providing a video or walking through reading a book. And so what we created was EOYDC Storytime, and both myself and our Vice President, Selena Wilson, and we actually encouraged other staff and parents and volunteers to get involved, and we were reading books. And what was so great is that we got put on the the parent resource list for First Five of California. And so you can look up EOYDC Storytime as a resource. And we focus on books that lift characters of color, but they're not all exclusively that way. We have some books on Berenstain Bears and other interesting stories. And then to the right, as a part of a partnership with the Brotherhood of Elders under the African American crisis response, we actually encourage teenagers who are arguably some of the most fluid moving through the community and oftentimes don't have masks. And so we did a partnership with Alameda County in terms of their health promotion, because they recognized that they didn't have a real platform to the teenage population. And during weekends, some of our young people would be able to give out masks and give out gloves and, you know, things to keep folks safe to try and stop the spread of COVID. So the visuals say a whole lot. Obviously, we've used them in social media. We've used them through our emails, and we featured them in our newsletters because, you know, for me, I thought this whole pandemic thing was going to be like a 30-day shut it down, let's get together. And, you know, now we're moving into almost a year of this. And if we don't get it under control, it's going to be a part of our future. And so we want to make sure that everybody is practicing good skills, has excellent supplies, and understands that we all need to be comfortable getting uncomfortable if we're going to get past this process. So I want to answer a question. Who in our organization was involved in creating and modifying our theory of change? So the person that took the lead on this was Selena Wilson, our vice president. She has actually been in charge of kind of navigating the whole COVID and CDC compliant work, along with the support of our finance manager and one of our senior directors. And so, you know, we began talking through this and recognizing that it actually was a critical opportunity that we needed to take. We shared some of the theory of change concepts with our board, and I'm not sure, you know, we were literally noodling this in a meeting and decided that we wanted to go with it and share it with our staff, and everybody received it very well. And the timeline for making the change, you know, I think it's kind of like the nonprofit world. If you really want to get something done, you can get it done in a day. You know, we didn't have to wait for a retreat or some day-long meeting to come up with the recommendations. Then it's really about tweaking it. And, you know, what I showed you was the conversation that we decided on, and we are still noodling. So if somebody comes up with some great observation, we could still make some adjustments in wording. It never has to be perfect. It's just perfect in your approach. So why don't we go to the next slide? So the next series of information are all examples of how we adjusted our communication to fit with what it was that we were doing. So if we go to the far right, the Facebook Live promotions, I was really excited because a partner, friend of mine, Reverend Cheryl Ward, actually pitched this idea of, you know, how do we engage our young people in a way that everybody can benefit from? And so we approached Congresswoman Lee, who could obviously see, you know, public health and COVID activity from, you know, on high with policy and dollar implementation. And so not only having her report out from what was going on in the nation's capital was really critical, but having her listen to our young voices talking about their fears, what they're doing, what their friends are doing. We invited Pendarvis Harshaw, which is he's got a KQED podcast called Right Nowish. He's an extraordinary young man, but he's also a journalist. And so having his thoughts and ideas, but as well that double layer of conversation back and forth was really critical. And then Mark Curry is an alumni of EOYDC, but he's also very interested in what's going on in Oakland. And this was a real serious conversation. So even though he is in fact a comedian, it was really important to, again, have his perspective going one way and being able to hear the young people and what they were concerned about. And then we tried for a couple times to include a DJ. So we had DJ Critty, you know, kind of putting some music on, because it's hard to have serious conversations without having some levity or something else to focus on. So moving to the wellness tip, we recognize, and I know some of you probably are well aware of the fact that people have been gaining weight during this COVID time because we are sitting still. We've got to move. And so these were tips that we designed primarily for our parents to make sure that our kids were engaged, but for everybody. And then the distance learning tips. Once we realized that we were going to have to open up kind of a community school to serve the most needy of our participants, we also wanted to create some tips for anybody to use to understand, you know, this Zoom life, this on the phone life, you know, you have to practice breathing, you got to take breaks, you got to, you know, nourish yourself. And so we began using pictures of our young ones and adding a few messages. Let's go to the next one. The next slide, please. There we go. So I shared our learning brief before, but I just wanted to identify it again because it's really important to learn from the safety measures that we put in place, not only for our families and our kids, but to remind our staff, to remind our volunteers, to remind our supporters what it is that we're doing. And we also identified that coming out of the summer, we were going to expand our services because we recognized how important that was to our young people. And having a document that just kind of showed our learning, it's incredible how many of our funders were really appreciative to get this. Okay, next slide. So, what's your short-term and long-term goal around communications, around getting a communication plan? If you don't currently have one, you should get one, because now more than ever, people are really focused on what are the greatest needs out there. I was on a call just yesterday. A really big donation is going to get announced for us. And while I was on the call, I asked, so what can we do for you? You know, there are a series of organizations that were getting this award, or this grant award. And it was like, hey, can we do a collective town hall that reports out what our impacts are each year? Because it's going to be a 3-year grant. In terms of communication skills and strategies, funders most of the time will not say, well, we want you to lift us up. But in that call, this particular funder, who I can't name until they announce the grant, said, hey, if our employees can be supportive on a Zoom call, this would be great. If you are doing events, town halls, whatever, we would love to be included. We want to know what's going on. We want to partner with you. We don't just want to give you money. And more and more and more, I am finding this to be the case. So when we celebrate their donation, we will also continue to find ways to work together so that it is really more of a partnership than just kind of one-way giving. And of course, we'll have reports that are required, those kind of things. But you will see us in short order celebrating on social media, in our newsletters, and all the ways, all the communication ways that we have to acknowledge these kinds of significant gifts, particularly at a time like this. And those promotions could awaken someone else to look at EOYDC or to look at your organization and say, hey, I never thought about this. Maybe I can create an opportunity here. And don't forget about the family funds. They are, through East Bay Community Foundation, San Francisco Foundation, and any number of other foundations. People are wanting to invest their money in organizations that make them feel good about the work. Impact almost always pulls at heartstrings. And I realize that I have done a lot of talking. If there are any more questions, I am happy to address them. When we look at short-term plans, you can talk about that's the next 30 days. A long-term plan these days might be 6 months. Hopefully by next summer, we won't even be wearing masks. But we need to plan for doing that because we have to make sure that this goes away. I can see once we get research, identify whether or not we want to do a vaccine promotion. We will make a decision about that. That's, kind of political and it's in the health space. But what we want to do is provide the best information possible for people. It's usually with a focus on young people. But we recognize that there are multi-generations of families living together and they've got to make decisions for everybody. If there are any other questions I can answer, I'm happy to. We have 5 minutes left. And I'm hoping that all of the different communications examples that I've thrown in there, and I will just repeat them, have a good story, great pictures, perhaps a graphic designer or someone who can identify messaging, because a great picture with a message is the best gift. If you want to revamp your newsletters, take a look and see what's out there. If there are partner organizations or just organizations that are crushing it, take a look at how they're formatting, how they're doing their templates. Make sure that your website correlates. We're still working on a new website, so we have to keep our old website up to date, and sometimes you forget about that. Making sure that you encourage your staff, your volunteers, your family and your friends to promote the work that you're doing. That's half of it, because your message goes out, but then it continues to go out and be supported. And that gets you maximum impact. And, sometimes investing in someone who can give you a communication plan, might be helpful. But there are so many examples out there. I'm always getting new ideas, but I'm an idea person myself. So I try to trust my judgment and see what the reaction is. If nobody likes it, well, then maybe it wasn't great, or maybe not everybody saw it. Sometimes we repost things, but we also keep a catalog of what it is that we're doing. Are there any other questions out there? Okay, maybe not, and that's just fine. Let's see. My email to get the email to get the recording for the first session. I think, Annalise, is that possible for you to put in the chat, or perhaps follow up with all the folks that are on this particular recording? I think that I direct you to Generation Thrive so they can follow up. And, experimentation is really key. I take a lot of risks in trying new things, and it has been in the risk-taking that I have found my greatest successes. Not everything will work, but what you're guaranteed of is not having anything work if you don't try. So try and fail and then try again. We are down to 2 minutes left. I want to thank everybody for their time today, for listening to the Building Power Platforms episode with me. We're going to have another one in January on leadership. I'm really, really excited about that one. I've been excited about them all, but you know, leadership is sustainable by you. And you will have more and more opportunities the more you step out there. You all can contact me on my LinkedIn page at Regina Jackson, or I am reachable via email, regina@eoydc.org. And certainly the social media platforms out there for EOYDC or my own personal ones, I can be reachable there. But I don't do Messenger because I have too many friends. Anyway, there's never enough friends, but I'm full. So just post a message. And following up with Generation Thrive. Yes, I just got another chat. Following it up with Generation Thrive for the recordings is exactly the way to do it. And let me also give a shout out to all of the other people who are hosting webinars. Generation Thrive has a full complement of different subjects for different audiences. There's a whole nother classification for teachers, and then one for nonprofits, because the entire goal of Generation Thrive is to provide resources to community in order to build the capacity to reach more young people. I want to thank all the funders for Generation Thrive. The primary partnership is certainly the Golden State Warriors and Kaiser, but there are so many important funders and partners in this work, too many to name. Thank you again. It is 11 o'clock. We will probably post the next session after the new year, so that everybody can kind of be focused on what they want to do for this next year. Again, thank you to the admin staff, Annalise, who's helped me through this whole session, Ayana Moody, and everybody there. Happy holidays and be safe, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you. Bye-bye.